Hey guys, my name is Zell. I'm here today with Tina and Anne from the Hersey High School Multimedia Communications class. And today we're also here with two very special guests, our school librarian, Mr. Janu, and one of our great English teachers, Mr. Mix here. Today we're going to be talking about a lot of the book banning laws that are being passed around the country today and why that's an issue. So I guess we should get started. First and foremost, on y'all's opinion on whether or not you think certain books should be banned in libraries. Like, are there any books that you can think of that you're like, yeah, this definitely shouldn't be in like a high school or something like that, or other ones? Like,
Well, there are definitely books that shouldn't be in high schools. I mean, there are standards like we don't have 50 Shades of Grey in the library. The general rule is, the Library of Congress has subject headings for every book out there. And anything that's labeled like erotica, that's not in our library. We tend to pick books that are reviewed well, that are geared towards a young adult audience. That doesn't mean that all of our books are young adult. I mean, we've got like Stephen King and other things there, but there are certain things that we do have to look out for because of our audience. And, the thing that makes high schools a little bit difficult is the age range. Because we go from freshmen all the way up to, in our district, we have students up to 22 years old. And so during the course of an average high schooler's career, they come in as little freshmen and they technically leave adults because most seniors they turn 18. And so we kind of have to balance the needs of a wide group of kids.
Yeah, to jump off that, it's complicated. It's even more complicated in the United States because we don't have any hate speech laws. So the First Amendment talks about clear and present danger, being something that would, block a book. But to silence anybody who might be offended or a critic is usually not good. I think what Mr. Janu is getting at, there's the context in a high school, if we're moving towards a high school, which is what we're talking about somewhat, is super complex. I think we need to think a lot about how do we create, and I think we have so much work to do. I think just watching, I noticed in my own students in class, coming back, even when we're here part-time after COVID, kids were tentative to talk together. They were afraid to be who they were, I guess. And I was like, wow, class discussion has gone from 0 to 0, which to me, we live in a democracy, right? A free democracy. And I think democracy requires that capacity to have discussions that are uncomfortable. We have to be able to talk together to create a discourse where we don't agree together. Our Capitol, the rotunda, is a big circle so that we can talk together using language and solve problems together. And I think social media adds to it because there's such a inundation of knowledge and speech and language and books and stories. It's incredible. So that's out of the school. But the problem is out of the school is always connected to into school now. Everything happens so fast. I think we have I'm kind of jumping around here, but we have a listening deficit. We don't listen to each other. We never slow down. And I feel like those echo chambers, those social media silos just get here and they stop. To me, what we're doing right here, I love that you're doing this, face-to-face communication, human to human, we need to do more of it. To me, it's absolutely essential because shared humanity at the center of things tends to solve so many problems when people actually know each other. And I do think, adding dignity to diverse voices of all kinds is super important. So everybody feels like in a community, whether it's Hersey community or the American flag, that we all belong. Everybody belongs here, and we need to be able to talk together when we disagree. So again, Mr. Janu gave a great kickoff there, localizing. We have to talk about context and the complexity of it. Oh my gosh, we could write books.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. You talked about social media, and social media has become an outrage machine. where people get on social media and they complain about books, since we're talking about books, and they pass around excerpts of books. And then they read those excerpts at board meetings completely out of context. So there's no context at all. There's no understanding of why that passage that they're upset with is there in the book or what purpose it serves. They just don't read, they admit, well, I'm not going to read this, and they just repeat what they've seen in this echo chamber that social media has become.
Yeah.
And that has become one of the biggest challenges that we have when people go to board meetings, and they have been going to D214 board meetings, reading excerpts from books, but completely taking it out of context.
Yeah.
And trying to put it into context is difficult when you have people that are unwilling to talk or unwilling to actually read the book. Mm-hmm. And so that's, it's happening in every school district. The other day in District 25, there was a parent that got up and read an excerpt from a book that he didn't like and admitted that he hadn't read the book, but the excerpt was something that he didn't like, and it was not something that kids should have access to. And it's a book that's been around for 20 years. It's not like, the stuff that they're attacking are new. It may be new to them because they're just getting the pop-ups on their social media, but then they go out and it's the outrage after outrage after outrage, and trying to, put a damper on that and talk about it and apply context becomes very difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I also think that social media can be like a double-edged sword in that kind of situation, because social media can put around like those excerpts from books that don't make sense. But then also even on like TikTok, I've seen John Green talk about how like his own books have been banned in some schools because people were taking excerpts out, and he goes onto that social media platform to say like, look, you need to read the whole book to understand that excerpt. But, social media is kind of tending to bring books out more into a negative light.
Yeah, I think there's like a plethora of banned books that I love reading them in the first place, because I'm like, okay, let's see why these are banned books. Why don't I read the whole actual story, unlike these people are, to get like why this excerpt is in this novel. So I think there's just so many banned books out there. They're missing an opportunity on like reading good literature. Like, I'd say one of my favorite banned books is American Psycho, and like I've argued before that it's actually like, it even talks about feminism, as like wild that may sound because of the toxic masculinity that's running throughout that whole story. What Bret Easton Ellis is trying to say is that this is how ridiculous men on Wall Street were sounding at the time, and people were just banning the book because it had like all these like violent scenes in it, but they weren't realizing what the whole point of the story was, or something like Clockwork Orange as well. There's just so many banned books out there that the violence, anything that's like explicit in there, they're in there for a reason. They don't throw it in there just to have something explicit or to shock people. They're in it in the story for a good reason. So like, I was wondering if there's any other banned books you guys have read like that you're just like.
Mix and I, we taught CAT together many years ago, and it was about 2008, I think, right?
Yeah.
There was a board member who didn't like, one, our course, and two, the books that we had in our course, and then other books. I think there were 11.
The things
books.
that carried.
Yeah, that was the big
she
one.
She really didn't like, because there were swear words in there. She didn't like the swearing. And it's a war story, so he's describing in some realistic ways and imaginative ways what it's like to be in a war and what it's like to come home from a war. So there's some violence in there.
Yeah, and and a lot of those works that she targeted had to do with language, and it became a big thing to the point that when they had a board meeting about these 11 books, it was phenomenal to watch, because they had to move the board meeting to the gym over at Forest View because so many students came in support of these books. And the meeting went on for like hours. You remember that? I mean, it was unbelievable with parents, and in particular these kids. It was like awe-inspiring for us that these kids went out there and defended books, and it was great to see. It's a little bit different now. The tone has kind of changed in the book banning world, in that it's not language that they are targeting. They're targeting books that deal critically with race and consequently critical of the history of race in our society, but also in particular sexuality as it deals specifically with LGBTQ plus individuals. And so that's what they are targeting. And so there are books that they are going after that have been a part of curriculum, have been a part of schools for 20 years that are suddenly just being rediscovered. I think there's more of a political kind of cultural war edge to the rhetoric that people have when they're attacking books now in schools, in board meetings, and they cloak it in this concept of parental rights. I have been going to board meetings and speaking, and there was somebody in my neighborhood who didn't like some of the books, and they're generally across the country the same. And she said that book shouldn't be in the library. And I said, do you know that there are parents that want their kids to have access to that book because they're about parent rights? It's like my right is that I should be able to say that my kid can't read that book or check out that book. And every parent has that right. Even in our district, a parent can call up and say, I don't want my son, daughter to check out this book. And we have to honor that. I don't know exactly what happens when they turn 18. When they turn 18, it's their decision. But they have that right. And I said that to this person. I said, well, you've got the right. You could say that your kid can't check out the book. But there are parents that want that book to be available. And then her answer to me was, well, those are bad parents. But how do you, that's kind of where they're coming from in this new age of book banning. Like it's, if my kid shouldn't have it, no kid should have it because I know what's best. And that's dangerous.
I see that coming from, if I look at my classroom, I like to think about it as a campfire where everybody gets to talk, and you have to know each other as a human being. You have to have compassion and care and see complexity and, personal history, social history. It's not like students. We have 2,000 kids here. They can't just unattach themselves from their shared history. And we need to learn in a democracy, again, back this, it requires us to have, to protect liberty, we've got to protect free speech. And I've noticed, it seems like there's cancel culture on the left and cancel culture on the right. Students at our school, we're told, we're going to stop reading Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. We no longer read To Kill a Mockingbird. We no longer read Huckleberry Finn. And they're in the library. Yeah. But in classrooms, in terms of infusing into culture. And that, to me, I understand. I think you cannot have, a free country has to be based on diversity and inclusion because everybody belongs. It's got to be implicit. Like, you belong to the Hersey community. You're a Hersey Husky. You don't get to say, like, hey, you're a Hersey Husky, you got to be like this. That's not what gets said. You're a Hersey Husky. I think we have so much deep work to do with building a culture where people see each other and respect each other with smart compassion and respect and dignity. Teaching Huckleberry Finn years ago, a student asked, what's the big deal with the language, the words, and a black student in the back. He just said, because it blinking hurts that much. You could have heard a pin drop. But it was also the most those kids learned all year. In fact, they probably don't remember one thing I said, but they remember that. I was lucky enough to have a wonderful professor it was a class at Northwestern. It was Black Presence in Faulkner. And we read all the Faulkner novels. And he built relationships with us. This is Leon Forrest. He was the chair of they have a day in Chicago named after this guy. Just a fantastic. He was so smart and brilliant. He would use jazz music, and he would show us clips of Michael Jordan, and then say connect it to the book, and just change your society with creativity. He always wanted us to be creative with books. He never wanted the books to stop. So he wanted us to connect everything to everything. Well, so I had massive respect for this guy, mainly because of his intellect. Next, because of his just love for us. This dude, he had cancer at the time he was teaching us, and he would just come. You could tell he was fighting pain. He loved the books, and he just kind of loved humanity, suffering and all. So about 8 weeks into the class, he'd built all these relationships with us, which I noticed a lot of people talking today. I'm like, God, we're moving so fast. We're doing so much. Some of these connections, like we didn't have trouble with our students in those classes because we had strong relationships with all those kids. We had tension in there that was crazy, but it was like we knew them by name and you knew their story, and we also knew, okay, we're gonna have to have a sit down here, two of you. We love both of you. Like this is gonna be okay. We're gonna be all right. We got to understand that this discussion is not the totality of this person, or this person you don't understand might have a history here that they can't do anything about that we have to deal with and contend with. But going forward, back to the professor. He goes, all right, I need 10 minutes of your time. And I'm going to read a passage out of Faulkner. And it's ugly. And this is some racist stuff. It's not good. It makes me feel terrible. He said, I'm going to ask for compassion. Okay? And here's what I'm going to ask. He goes, if you didn't grow up with black skin, I'm going to ask you to just give me a minute to grieve. And you're going to picture like we're at a wake. And I want everybody to just kind of feel it and just allow me to grieve. And can you be there for me? Can you be there for me? Because I'm feeling something here when I read this passage. So he reads it, and he's obviously a dramatic reader. I think about that all the time. It was a transformative moment in my education. I dedicated the book Invisible Man, if you have my old copy, to him for changing my life and my perceptions about what it means to be an American. And now we no longer teach the book.
I mean, yeah, ironically, so I'm in a class called College Literature, Stories Matter, and I think it was because of a complaint that our teacher gave us Invisible Man to read, and then the next week he just said, give me all of the copies back, we're not going to be doing this anymore, because someone complained about, learning about critical race theory, but, learning those things are how you get to see things from a different perspective. Personally, as a student, too, taking AP Literature was, a rude awakening to me, because I didn't know anything about Christianity, but then having to analyze those stories, I learned about Christianity, and I kind of realized why religion was important to other people. And when you take away those understandings and those analyzations of certain books from the students, they don't really get to grow as people anymore.
Mm-hmm. I feel like if we keep doing this, we're just gonna lose empathy for each other. And I know you also mentioned that Invisible Man and To Kill a Mockingbird were some books that we don't teach here anymore, but we don't call them banned books necessarily from Hersey because they're still in the library, but we just don't teach them anymore. So, why are they no longer part of the curriculum is a question that is thrown around a lot, but it's also how do we define what these books are now in our school, because we can't teach them anymore. Scarlet Letter, I was excited to read that junior year and analyze it, and Mr. Michelin was so excited.
So mad last year.
I was so mad when he was we can't read Scarlet Letter. I was like, oh my God. How are those approached in meetings?
Okay, let's be clear about something. There are no banned books in the Hersey Library. Mm-hmm. All right, there have been no books banned. We live in a state that just passed a law saying that libraries can't ban books. Mm-hmm. We are the only state that has that law now. So there are no banned books in the library. All of the books that we've been talking about here, from Invisible Man to Kill a Mockingbird, are all in the library. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's nothing banned from the library. And so it's a different kind of conversation talking about what should be taught in class to what books we hold in a collective space. And that's really what a library is. The library is a collective space where you have stories that span all of humankind. And they're there for empathy, and they're there for choice, because nobody is making somebody read a book from the library. So, like right now, we have people complaining about books we have in the library, but nothing's been banned. There is a process that if somebody wants to have a book physically removed from the library, there is a process that they have to follow, because we live in a democracy where you have to follow process. And so it goes through several channels, but nothing has been banned anywhere in District 214.
Just looking at I always try to think about back to, the libraries do much to promote cultural conversations. If, you could look at good old Clifford Geertz, right? We are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And if I try to imagine my kids' kids and the conversations they have, I guess I'm definitely an idealist, and sometimes I'm overly positive. I believe when humans understand each other's suffering, there can be profound connections that they make. It's like, if you understand somebody's suffering, it's enough to disarm all hostility. I've always believed that. Kind of like what you were talking about. What's your first name again?
Anne.
Anne. When you were talking about, you took AP Lit, and you read some things, and you understood some Christian stories that you hadn't understood, but the key word there is understanding. And then you were making connections, so you were more ready to talk to someone who you might not have understood before, and I hope it's vice versa. See, to me, it's like the massive work that we have to do is, when you look at the library, libraries are symbolic of our cultural narrative, and our commons, our political commons needs a lot of work. It's a disaster. And our emotional commons. I really want to protect the emotional commons, because as a teacher, one of the things I'll do, I'll read everybody's name on my class list. I remember that's a personal story, that's an individual, that's an individual, that's an individual, that's an individual. And every single one of them suffers, and I don't know what that is yet. And I try to remember, they're not all going to get along, but the books and the stories, I believe in good old Aristotle, medicine for the soul. I think the arts can do that. I think they're that powerful, and maybe I'm too hopeful, but I know that, having taught for a long time, that whether it's at a concert or looking at a painting or reading a book, that if we organize and orchestrate libraries and classrooms and stories, we can gradually start chipping away from work to understand, so that we can actually collaborate together. And I think if we can collaborate, to me, the answer is always more speech. I don't want anybody silenced. No way. Don't silence. I don't want silencing, because I'm a First Amendment nut, because I want the First Amendment protected. But because to protect that is to protect the American project, our national project, where everybody's from somewhere else, and we're all diverse. We need that diversity, talking together. And when there's dissent, we keep adding voices, if you look at American history, in a good way. And usually, if you end up blocking speech, you have some sort of voice that, whether it was women or, civil rights, having some sort of piece of justice be lost that doesn't fit with American liberty. I never appreciate that, because I just think we could be better and move towards a creative space and a counter discourse. Like, I think your generation, a lot of you are so nice and kind, and I hope that as adults, we give you the venue to really get to know each other in an understanding way, so that you can collaborate and then create a narrative that leaves our classrooms, our libraries, because we have to contend with the monolithic monster of social media and those silos. And you're out there you're in the trenches out there, building relationships and forming political alliances and self-concepts. I just hope that for all of you, that you use your kind souls and your bright minds, and that you create a better discourse than we've given you. Our generation on Facebook has failed you. Facebook warriors are not the models.
I mean, I know you just talked about kindness, but then I guess, what would you do when it comes to, writing, hate speech in writing and hate speech in books? I know we just talked about kindness, but it's how do we view that then?
Hate speech is a tough one, because it depends. From a library perspective, we don't have any laws dealing with hate speech, but and obviously in a community, you have to have, that there's clear and present danger. You can't harass somebody. You can't just walk around using derogatory terms, and again, context, and reading a book where someone's feelings are hurt. I do think it's tough, because how do you have education hurts and growth hurts, and I respect people. I love my students. I do think as a culture to have the democracy, you have to have dissent, but we might have feelings hurt. If every time someone's feelings are hurt, we have to silence everything, we're never going to understand each other and grow together. The same as I was telling that story about my professor. He made me understand something. Reading that Faulkner, he said he didn't want, me or any of the other, the white students in the class, his students, to do anything other than be with him and just let him grieve and have a moment. He goes, that's what I want you to understand. He goes, that's the best thing I can have you understand. And then he broke out a cake and we listened to some jazz music. He's like, let's jam. And that was intentional because the jazz music, and you would have seen this in Invisible Man, is used in a creative way. Like something new is going to come here, something better. There's better ways than these silos and, stereotypes and surface conversations to get to know each other.
What books are you most disappointed that we aren't allowed to teach anymore?
Well, it's not really disappointment. I guess it's just one of my favorite books is Invisible Man, and that's who knows, that might come back. I don't even know. And it's Huck Finn. I always thought was and I understand too, and I have over the years. And this is where I think there's complex context is required. Deep conversations and really, again, getting to know each other with looking at those books, it took a long time. I would not want to, if everything's too fast-paced, if we're pushing everything, you can't just go into like, okay, you got to cover this. You got to take 3 weeks with that book, and you better know your students, and you better love them, right? Or you're going to have huge problems. I have a lot of conversations with when I was Huck Finn, when that happened, the kid's name was Silas. I said, Silas, this book is, it's painful. Are you okay? I would always check in with him and just talk with me, and and he would tell me, oh man, But I think to grow out of that, I think if our civic body, again, I'm very optimistic. Our civic body is, if I had to diagnose it, not healthy emotionally. And I think if you look at any relationship, all of those relationships kind of come together. And like therapy, I think our culture needs therapy. And one of the things you got to do in therapy is talk about the pain. But it's got to be in a safe, trusting environment. As animals, pack animals, man, we don't do well when we don't trust each other. So I haven't thought too much about, some of those books, but what I really want to think about is the future and those conversations that we want to build for the best of all to keep, to me, God, inclusion, diversity, yes, please. Stand around the American flag and talk, but respect dissent. How can you have, we love liberty, but it's just my liberty. That's Putin stuff.
Yeah. It's difficult. Like a book like Invisible Man is a difficult book to teach because there's so much context involved. And so it has to be done right. Right? Not anybody can just go in and put down the book, Invisible Man, and just start teaching it. There has to be an understanding across discipline, across disciplinary understanding. You just not have to understand the book and the structure of the book and the lyrical nature of the book. You have to understand the history. You have to understand Ralph Ellison and his world. So you got to be able to bring in all of that. And not everybody can do that effectively. One of my favorite books is To Kill a Mockingbird. I've always loved it. Atticus Finch, to me, was kind of this guy I kind of put up. I'm like, I want to be a dad like Atticus, and I loved it. We do a forum every year here since 1999 that's centered on To Kill a Mockingbird. The forum we still do, but it's no longer centered on To Kill a Mockingbird. And I still love the book. It's still in our library. But there are, when you look at bigger pictures, there are some problems with the book that, there's a narrative in the book, this kind of white savior narrative that's a part of a lot of our literature. in the United States that then tells this story that, a white person has to come in and save the day. And I get how, people are like, well, that's not, that's telling kind of a false narrative. I get that. And I understand why some people would not want that to be taught anymore. And it's not just the language, it's not just the racial slurs that are in there. It's that kind of narrative that is a little bit problematic when we look at the history of our country. So I get that, but there is no way I would ever say that To Kill a Mockingbird doesn't have a place, especially in a library, because that's the collection of stories. And the hate speech thing, that's that's like a gray area. And
It's crazy.
Right. I mean, we have a copy of Mein Kampf in our library, and it should be there. Mein Kampf is the book that Hitler wrote. That sets the stage for everything that Hitler did. And it's a vile, disgusting book. I've taken courses where I've had to read it a couple times. And every time I'm like, I got to take a shower because it is just so awful. But
We learned, don't repeat that.
exactly. I mean, it needs to be there. Now, do some people check? It's rarely checked out, but do some people go and check it out like this and believe that it's the best thing written? Do they agree? Maybe, but it's part of the history, and it needs to be available for people to try and understand, what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See, for me, you look at, back to Mockingbird, one of the best things that book did for our freshman curriculum, if you think about junior high, let's face it, I mean, a lot of that time of life just flat out sucks. Mm-hmm. I remember my biggest dilemma was like, okay, I hope I'm feeling comfortable at the lunch table today, and I hate my math teacher, if it's just that simple. But anyway, To Kill a Mockingbird, especially for young Americans, it was America's favorite book in 2018, Oprah's favorite book 2019. And I think part of the reason is if you can look, it's kind of like the critical approach, you can pay attention. There is an element of a white savior narrative in there that you can see and you can find. A dissenting voice might say, actually, that Atticus Finch was our Constitution with a conscience, that the rule of law, right? Freedom and the rule of law go together, and that our laws can work. And I always try to remind, when looking at that book, like, wait a second, what bugs me the most about us not reading that book is, what about Harper Lee? 1960, small town Alabama, a girl that nobody wanted to hear from, writes this book. This is a massive act of courage. I bet $10 you can find stories about the KKK throwing bricks through her window. That has to be honored, right? And the context is real. But another thing about Mockingbird, and I think, it's like going forward, and thanks for having this because it makes my brain think. I love to think about ways to put conversations and tables together. I would love to have our students en masse have Harper Lee. It doesn't have to be even the whole book, but on a voice, to speak at a table, at a discussion, because one of the things that book did so well, better than most books, is it really put the idea of empathy into the culture, right? And so I think it is important to enforce, freedom of speech and dignity for all in libraries. And I think in classrooms, it's even more important to do that, because it's where public schools are the one place we all share together with a chance to negotiate and navigate the social narrative that is how we feel about belonging and being together.
But then, I was told that the book Just Mercy was kind of put in as a replacement for books that might have a white savior type. Do you think that that was justified kind of?
It's when you use the word justify means.
I mean, yeah, I need
No,
to
it's
maybe
okay.
reword it.
No,
but yeah.
I love it. I'm an English teacher. I'm a nerd. Only nerds break down words, right? So I have to. I'm kind of talking to myself to get to your question. It's a great question. It means that, basically the idea of something would be deserved, right? And Just Mercy has, obviously putting that into the curriculum has good intentions, right? We're trying to create discussions about history and feelings and compassion and all those things, right? I think that that's, I haven't read Just Mercy. I've just read excerpts like the people, but I do know that I believe, there's a great TED Talk connected with it that follows from stories and personal narrative. And I think that book, from what I can tell from the TED Talk, does a lot for the idea of lived experience being respected. And I think lived experience should be respected, but I think all lived experience should be respected. And that's what's complicated, is getting that stuff together. If you look at stories, is it justified? Sure, you can justify it, right? That book, maybe it'll replace To Kill a Mockingbird, right? But there's another side of me. I think we need to talk about things that, if we keep drawing lines where every time someone's offended, I don't know how we're ever going to work through it. It's like, okay, if you have a relationship, say it's a marriage, well, you're offending me, we're not talking about that. You're offending me, this hurts my feelings, we're not talking about it. This hurts my feelings, we're not talking about it. This hurts my feelings, we're not talking about it. How are we going to work forward to a collaborative, creative, compassionate, better narrative? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think the things that hurt, and that's where, like Mr. Janu was saying, man, this is hard. You really have to, I think part of our culture, you have to not be so damn busy and talk together and listen to, get to know people so we can have these conversations. Because if people don't know each other and they become the silos and the echo chambers and they become symbols, that's the problem. Language is deficient. Language is just symbolic. And humans are flawed. We're tired. We're crabby. And now we want to talk about Just Mercy and the beauty of it, and To Kill a Mockingbird and the beauty of it. But behind it is not just about Mockingbird. If we only pick books that make kids feel safe and students safe all the time, I think we're going to have trouble living together outside of schools.
Exactly.
Just Mercy is a great book. I think it's brilliant. And it's a true story. And there are people that have problems with that too, because it is about injustice in the criminal justice system. And the people that are going to school boards, they don't like that discussion because they don't want people to discuss that kind of part of our history. That is found in Just Mercy, that's found in To Kill a Mockingbird, Invisible Man, Huck Finn. There is this, race is and always has been a fundamental part of the American experience. It's embedded. We define it. We use it in the Constitution itself. And so, like today, people don't want, there are so many people that, well, there is no more racism. And they don't want that discussed at all. And then they throw out words like critical race theory. We can't have people, talking about critical race theory. And it's not even a term that I've ever used. We taught together for years, and we did a lot of stuff on race, and suddenly this word comes out. It's like, what are these people talking about? And it's that critical part. They don't want the critical discussion about how race has kind of informed American life throughout history. And so there is this willingness out there, or this desire out there, to shut all of that down, when these stories are what is needed to build that empathy and to build that understanding about our past, because we live in a world and in a country, like any place in the world, that is connected to the past. Mm-hmm. And if you take all of that stuff out, because we don't want people to feel bad, then we're losing an opportunity to understand ourselves.
Yeah. The debate on censorship has definitely been an issue for decades. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think we're very lucky that we do live in a state where in March they passed a bill where they can't ban books in libraries. But we also, there's my phone, we also have to talk about just how serious it is on why censorship is dangerous in America, especially when Florida, in just the 21-22 school year, they banned over 500 books, including The Diary of Anne Frank, The Life of Rosa Parks. Like, how do they justify that is what I'm
Well,
wondering.
In Florida, they have a system where one person can object to a book and the book has to be withdrawn. That's a recent law, and 300 of those books that have been is the result of one person, one guy.
That's so crazy.
Going and just saying, I don't want this book, and so they remove it. And the same thing in Texas. They have a system where if somebody complains, the book is removed from the shelf until the process goes through. But the process never finishes because they can't keep up with everything. And so that's the tactic that is being used in these states. And there are lists that are generated from Texas and Florida, and those lists are circulated to various groups, including Moms for Liberty, which is the most ridiculous name for a group. They're really Moms Against Liberty. They are one of the biggest book banners, and they hate it because I use the term book banner for some of these people that have talked at our board meetings. I call them book banners, and they don't like that term because that term has a bad connotation in our history, because we have a history of being anti-censorship. And so when you call somebody a book banner, like, we just, parental rights, we just want to, be able to have a say in what our kids read. And they do have that say, but they want to have that say for everybody. So I kind of forgot where I was going with this, actually. So, we've got to really be careful that censorship is something that has reared its head many times. I just finished a paper last summer on the book Howl, Allen Ginsberg's poem, that the bookseller who published it in City Lights Books in San Francisco got an order in and had several hundred copies, and they were raided by the police and put on trial for obscenity. And it's those moments in our history where I get like the optimism that you were talking about, because they clearly defined what obscenity is. And so it's called the Miller test. There is a test to say whether or not something is pornographic or obscene. Yet that's something, language is very loaded. And so we've got people calling books that we have in our library pornography, and it's not. And I feel that if some of these people would just actually read the book and not take it out of context and look at what it actually, the purpose and the intent is. And in every case, these books that are being targeted, every case, those things that they object to, its purpose is to develop compassion and understanding for what another human being experiences, the life of another human being, and that's the purpose of these books. And there is this kind of disconnect with that, and so these people just want to, because it's got like descriptions that they don't like, or words they don't like, or discussions that make people uncomfortable, like about race and justice and so forth. We would rather not have to deal with it, and that's the most dangerous thing when it comes to censorship, is not being able to have these discussions and not being able to develop an understanding that leads to empathy. And once that empathy is destroyed, we're done.
And it's, to me, if you can look historically, that's what's so great about America to me, is the First Amendment. And look at a crisis, a war, or whatever, one of the goals of citizens, right, is to build community, and to, during a crisis or after a crisis, I think it is important to avoid censoriousness, right, to stay away from that, and to be aware that we need to protect, there is, and I don't think we talk enough about this, patriotism is, to me, a wonderful thing. Love for your country. Our country's an idea, right? And it's really easy to say, if you go out on social media, it's divided in different ways. That, to me, is not, you know, the America that I grew up loving or love now, you know, because patriotism is much different than nationalism. They're two very different things. And, you know, love for liberty would be inclusive, and it would include diverse voices, and it would have a situation where we use language and love and logic to build the political structures that we follow to maintain a free democracy, which takes work, and it definitely takes dissent, and it takes being uncomfortable. You know, so I'm hoping that the far right and the far left can figure out in the middle we have the common project of America, which is just so cool and awesome and not done. It's unfinished business, right? And I think that to protect, you know, the narrative for your kids, you know, your generation, you are kind, you are compassionate, and I love that you're listening to each other and looking for, I don't know, I was raised this way, kind of maybe the Irish background. You just find somebody suffering and understand it, and the response from, you know, my mom's side of the family, you know, was always something with the arts. The Irish are always dancing or writing or storytelling, right? And my grandfather was Slovenian, and they were always going to build a community. They were going to stick together, you know, and do all that stuff. But I think those things all came together in, I think there's a new sense of America, I hope, with pride, which is absolutely patriotic and inclusive. You know, when I was walking out in an American flag hat the other day, and some kid scowled at me. I was like, "You don't even know me." I probably love you.
Yeah, I mean, like, I know we're talking, like, nationally, but even, like, just, like, looking at censorship worldwide, like, I'm someone who's also, like, a proud Korean, and, you know, if you ask Japanese people, like, what they think about, like, the Forgotten War, which was, like, Japan and Korea, they don't know anything about it, and they don't have any, like, the government, it's really the government at fault, but it's like they don't have any guilt or fault towards it because the people aren't even aware of the history that happened, and what they say is history repeats itself, and that's why it's so important to not censor things. And, you know, and you can even see in censorship just like a lot of the hate that went on before too, where it's like the Chicago fire, they said the Irish caused it, which you'll see that when I was younger, I was learning about that, and I remember going home to my dad, who's very Irish, and being like, did we cause this? And it's like,
Myth.
that's why
It was
you need
easy.
to have that conversation, and, like, you know, that's what you need to learn from, and not censor things.
They block it out of books, but, like, the news, every day you hear something. And, like, at my house, the news is always on. And, like, I know so many other people, parents, like, listen to the 7 p.m. news. And, like, it's all over social media, too. So just, like, getting rid of these books from schools doesn't, like, eliminate, or it doesn't get rid of the problems entirely. It just, like, pushes them back.
It also doesn't get rid of those ideas that are already there. It's just like an actual, like, written out idea, and that's why I feel like so many parents have an issue with it.
Well, and I actually, again, I'm too much of an optimist, but I do love the kids I teach, and I trust, like, sitting here with you guys makes me feel good. Like, I mean, it's like cathartic, like, oh my God, like, everything's gonna be okay.
One of the things, I talked about this at the forum that I did on race a couple of weeks ago, that the thing that makes me optimistic about the future is your generation. I mean, your generation right now is more active politically and with issues that affect you. When there was that school shooting down in Tennessee 3-4 weeks ago, students walked out of school in Tennessee and shut down the Tennessee State House because they wanted something done with guns. And it was thousands of mainly high school students and some college students just walked out and walked down there, and it freaked people out. The election that we had in, the 2022 election was determined in some states like Wisconsin, and in a lot of cases here in Illinois, by people of your generation. And that makes me happy, because there are issues that your generation is very in tune with and want change. And I think that's a great thing, and it's scaring some people to the point that there are politicians now talking about raising the voting age.
My parents are like, because I'm very active and very, like, we should, like, why, I'm reading an essay about, like, school shootings and, like, why we shouldn't have that accessibility to guns. And my parents are like, why do you care so much? Like, you're just 17. And I'm like, no. Like, I'm going to be able to vote next year. Like, it's all of this matters. Because, like, we're the future. Like, we're the ones who are going to grow up and deal with all of this stuff. And, like, it impacts everybody.
Old enough at 18 to, like, buy a gun, but I can't even drink. Like, that's insane. Like,
It is. I mean, it's nuts.
Like, it is
Think
so
about
crazy.
real change. You finish, I cut you off.
Oh, no, I was done.
Something I would hope is that when you have dissent and you say something like gun control and you got strong voices and strong voices, how do we use that American capital properly? And the people who would protect the Second Amendment and the people who would say, we got to change this stuff. And we got big hearts and big hearts here. How do we talk together for the betterment of our country? Because right now there's just nothing. It's called stasis. That's the Greek term. Mm-hmm. It's like a puddle of water doing nothing, and in the meantime, people keep getting hurt. So how do we get out of the stasis? Because it seems like, and that's what I mean by those conversations that are difficult, right? Where how do we talk together with people we disagree with? Because man, it's hard. It's like emotional. You're sweating up that hill, but how do we do it? I don't have the answers, and that's why
there is a book now that has made the list of people going to school boards to try and remove. It's a book from 2007, and it's by Jodi Picoult, and it's called 19 Minutes. It was published in 2007. It's about a school shooting, right? And people are going to boards saying this shouldn't be in the library because why should kids have to read about that?
Because it's
I
a
think
possibility.
Like,
Like,
it's all
Right. I
important.
mean,
Every
it's
5
something
minutes.
that all of us who not work in schools or go to schools have thought about.
Yeah.
There's probably that's probably something that you've worried about at some time. During your and to say that you shouldn't be allowed to read about it is bizarre to me.
Yeah.
It's like we allow you to be shot in school, but we don't want you to be. We don't want you to read about it.
They need us. I think
crazy.
politicians need to start thinking about what's actually hurting kids, these automatic assault rifles or books, because what in reality is the leading cause of death for children in America? It's literally gun violence. So I don't get how they can't think through that they need to change that.
When I was doing my research, I was stumbling across other countries, and like they had one incident and then completely banned rifles. Like, rifles are for war, not for. I should not be able to buy a rifle in like a month, and then they're trying to just. Oh, it's. I don't know.
Remember
And-
Australia
Brings up
did
that
that. I
question.
think.
Australia, Canada, the UK. Like,
If we had NRA members here with your good, kind, smart voices, how would you talk together to them? I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
how do we because
And it's, sorry, like, not even to play devil's advocate, but it's so interesting to see how it's like we have liberty and we have freedom, and that's what we want for the books. But then also when it comes to even like issues like guns and like versus books, it's like that's
they try to baby us so much. But
They-
then
yeah,
like,
and it's
expect
so-
us to like know what to do in the situations then, and like.
But
how to
also,
react.
even then, it's like the issue is parenting. Like,
That's a big
parents
one.
that want to, especially in schools, parents that want to remove books because they don't want their children to learn something, they are the problem because they're not helping their kids learn empathy for other people. And they're scared of their kids learning different ideas and different issues that they don't want them to have. And so I was so sad when we stopped learning about like race theory in class, because I feel like that's something that a lot of people could benefit from, as there's a lot of hate speech going around on the internet. But then just one complaint and we just stopped learning about it. And it's like, we need to have those uncomfortable and controversial discussions. And, I mean, I definitely understand, like, teachers, like, they don't want to get fired, so they can't bring up that conversation. But it's something that, like, students especially and just people, everyone should, like, start having more, because the reason why things are getting banned is because.
I feel like the older generation is kind of like intimidated by how like powerful we are and how like educated we are, and they're like, no, like you have to push back, so you can't learn this. Like, that's just so like silly. Like, are you like?
They talk about respect, but it's like we can do this in respectful ways. Like, we can
Right?
push back in a respectful way.
There's a lot of fear. I mean, we as Americans live in a culture of fear. more so than in other countries. You know, you watch the news and it's all fear-based. You got to be afraid of going into Chicago because you're going to get carjacked or shot. And, you know, Chicago's not the most crime-ridden city in the country, but the way they talk about it. So we're always fearful. And there is some, especially when it comes to like book stuff, there is some fear in standing up for books. When I talked at board meetings or when I've been on social media defending a book, I've gotten threats. I've been called a pedophile. I've been called a bunch of names simply because I said that the book Genderqueer is a beautiful book that helps you understand what this one person went through in their life. And the school got calls for me to be fired because I said this book was good. And so when that happens, and it's purposeful, when people like attack those who have differing opinions or advocating for books in this case, there tends to become this fear, oh, I better not say anything because I could lose my job. I could have somebody come to my house with a gun. You know, there's that fear factor there that is used against people when they advocate for freedom and for books and for, you know, allowing people who may be different from you to have a voice in a library, because there needs to be a place where people can go to find themselves. And the library is where that is, because we have to be able to provide for those people who can find themselves in books.
Yeah, that's why I totally wanted to have this podcast, this whole discussion, was because we need to discuss the importance of how censorship is dangerous and how we need to learn, we can learn empathy from these books by having them in schools. So to just ban them, to ban history, to ban someone's personality, to ban like someone's self-experiences, like that's not gonna fix anything in America. That's not gonna help anything. It's not gonna fix the problem in history. It's not gonna erase history at all. So I think it's a big, important issue that even though it might not affect us entirely, because like we passed a bill, like we said, that doesn't have banned books, but like not allowing you guys to teach like certain books anymore, like this is dangerous because we need to learn how to understand one another, like we said, and that's why I just loved having this conversation, was because this is still an issue, even locally, not as extreme as like Florida, but still even in District 214, there's stuff, you know, discussions like this all the time. So I really appreciate you guys coming in today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. You guys are awesome.
Thank you so much. I mean, we love, like, obviously we knew that having a librarian, someone who loves books and knows like what kind of, who actually reads these books, like, you know, and same with an English teacher who's like read and taught these books, and you both know what's important about them. And then like us students, we're passionate about these books and novels and literature and why we know that, why they are important. So we understand you guys. And we're glad that you understand us and we can have a conversation about this. I'm really thankful for that. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is Hersey Dispatch. And once again, it's Zell, Tina, and Ann here with Mr. Mix and Mr. Janu. Thank you so much for listening on this podcast. Bye-bye.